Welcome to another episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club. I am your one-eyed, hobbling veteran host, Cameron, and with me, as always, is the light, bringing the hope to the rest of the team and the tactics that win us the day, Drew. How are you, Drew?
I'm doing great. And today we're going to be covering chapters 34 through 36 of the first book of the series, Empire of Silence. I am excited.
Yeah, now it's going to be interesting because we're shifting now from high-minded Hadrian that is constantly in his thoughts. We're moving to a very, very action-heavy portion of the book.
Yeah.
This section is not like our previous section where he has to really think about his time on the streets and sort of everything blends in. From now on in the story, we have a goal, a destination. He has a direction in which he is moving. So can you remind us of what happened to Hadrian at the end of the last arc?
Yeah, so at the end of the last arc, so we had this meeting with Xenos for the first time. We got to meet the Umand with Kat. It's sort of this magical, strange moment with the intrigue of seeing Xenos for the first time matched with the cruelty of the sort of environment of Amesh, of the people who are sort of enslaving the Umand. And then we have a very heartfelt, sad chapter where we actually lose Kat to the rot, which sort of in some sense frees Hadrian to do what he wants, but also so is like his first real grief in a sense. As the chapter goes on into the next one, we have him getting involved with the Rel gang and having this sort of robbery gone wrong moment where he stabs somebody and he's separated, but he's looking down and Colosso's mentioned, which connects back to his brief conversation with Old Man Crow. And so he decides, you know what, I'm actually going to give this a shot and I'm going to try to join Colosso. The last chapter in the last episode ends with him actually trying to get ready to be a myrmidon. The medical examiner is looking at him, discovers a Palatine, and he sort of pleads with this person to just allow him into the fighting pool and just let him in and don't give him away.
Which is where we begin with chapter 34, Men of Grosser Blood.
Yes.
So presumably she does, and he does. And we knew that she was going to anyway, if we were reminded of chapter 1 of the book, when we now begin the section in which we learn about Hade of Borosivo, the myrmidon known as Hade in the city of Borosivo.
Yes.
We begin chapter 34, Men of Grosser Blood. So similar to his time on the training ground in Delos, he is now training with the sword, trying to teach other people in this situation some of the abilities that he has. He is sparring with a red-haired kid whose name is Switch. Meanwhile, while he is doing this, and Hadrian is critiquing his footwork and all this different stuff, myrmidons, again, are the name for the people who fight against the gladiators. So we have the gladiators, who we know from our previous chapter in chapter 6 are the professional athletes of this world, and the myrmidons are the unfortunate souls that have to face against them. And there's a variety of different, setups and things like that. But think Gladiator, the movie, and Maximus and this kind of stuff. That's sort of the aesthetic that this beginning of this arc evokes. So another myrmidon who we would get to know a lot better, named Gen, has given up on Switch already. Switch is this kid who has no combat ability whatsoever. So you see a dichotomy of different people as he begins in Colosso. You see some people that are criminals, like Gen, who has his nose slit, and Siren, who also has her nose slit. You see this woman named Kiri, who is a rare person that isn't a criminal. She is there of her own free will, trying to pay for her kid to get through selection test exams for the Legion, essentially. And you see a variety of people at the bottom of society trying to build their way up. Switch is one that is not a criminal, but he is a sex slave / prostitute that is giving up that part of his life and has decided that this would be a better way to live. He's particularly a sex slave because of his complexion and his hair color. So we had gotten an indication previously when we started on Borosiva that all the princes have fiery hair. So now we can put 2 and 2 together. The reason that Switch was a prostitute, or as successful as he was in his previous life, it was because of the fact that he shares some of the traits with royalty. Which is kind of gross.
Yeah, it's really messed up. It's interesting here because we head into this scene and we have sort of a hardened Hadrian but he still has some of his old, caring kind of reflexive empathy left in some sense, because, in the last episode, we're talking about him stabbing someone, but here we are where he's helping someone who the other folks are viewing as a liability. That's still a part of him, right? We haven't lost all of this part of Hadrian to the streets of Imesh, right? Which is encouraging to see. We've sort of gone through a transformation, but not everything has been cut clean off, which is cool.
Yeah. So he's trying to get a lay of the land. He's basically been there for 2 weeks and yet has not fought yet in the Colosso. And we'll find more about the contract that he is under as it relates to his work in Colosso later. But right now he's just trying to get a feel for the group and things like that. And Gen and Siren are sort of the criminal leads, let's say. They have their loud voices in this room of 20 people, and they're bugging Switch. And because they see Switch as weak and as the weakest link, they are concerned that they should not just they should give up on him and let him die, because if they focus too much effort trying to save him or whatever, then their lives could be potentially cut short.
Yeah. And I will say, I think it's easy sitting here reading a book to like, oh yeah, Hadrian, like totally in the right here. If I was about to step into a Colosseum and maybe die, I think it's so tempting to just be like, all right, listen, I'm cutting my losses. I'm not taking care of anybody else. Like I'm not taking care of this kid who's this twig of a man who doesn't know how to hold a sword. Yeah, I'm going to practice my sword swings, and if he can not be a part of our team after he gets killed in the next round, because it's very easy for self-interest to creep in extreme circumstances. Yeah. So it sort of speaks to Hadrian that he is, even in this circumstance, being able to be ethical, which is cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a discussion about whether or not they will have Royce shields. In the midst of all this, as they're arguing, Hadrian throws a helmet at Switch, and he's aiming for his arm or something like that, but ends up hitting him in the stomach and doubling him over. That sort of is a pin drop moment for everybody else in the yard. Of course, this is Hadrian being his most dramatic self, right? His melodramatic, I'm going to speak to the group. He sort of takes a role of being a drill sergeant, and he uses that illustration of throwing the helmet as a reminder that, hey, even if you had a Royce shield, it wouldn't have blocked the helmet that I just threw.
Right. It's worth reminding, because we haven't had a ton of combat with shields in the series quite yet, that they are not like shields from Dune. Just so this is a difference that's important, is that if I shoot someone with a projectile, that moves so fast that it will bounce off of a Royce shield. But essentially anything a human can produce in terms of speed, throwing things, striking with a sword, even at full speed, the shield will not do anything. So in a situation where you're stepping in a Colosso, if they walk in there and there's some gladiator with a high matter sword, it does not even matter if they gave them a Royce shield, right? They're still getting cut down immediately. It's not going to save them from anything. I'm glad he reminds the audience of this fact, because we're going to start getting stuff in the future where this actually matters. Like, hey, by the way, this is different. This is how it works. So
today, actually, in this episode.
Yeah.
So as others, in particular, Kiri, the mom, starts to console Switch, because the moment he gets doubled over, Gen starts laying into the kid. Gen is a bully. He's clearly a bully, and Switch is weak, and he is trying to make Switch give up on his life so he doesn't have to feel bad about giving up on him in the arena, so he can just worry about himself and not have to worry about the weakest link. I wanted to read what Hadrian writes on page 222, reiterating what you had said about the edges that he has sort of gained in his time since Kat's death. He says, since I'd come to the Colosseum 2 weeks earlier, I'd come to realize how hard-edged my time in the streets had made me. Those weeks, those months since Kat's death had done their damage. I recalled the robbery that I'd carried out with Rel's gang, the way I betrayed them, and the knife I'd buried in the shopkeeper's shoulder. The temperate edges that had separated me from the others in my family had been chipped away, the mosaic defaced by the iconoclast. These past days among the myrmidons had made that clear, had become an exercise in reconstruction. I held that breath for a long time, glad of the cooler night air, thick with the haunt of flies and the hiss of ornithons. I wiped the sweat from my brow. He is remarking at the fact that he is not, similar to what you said, he's not the same person.
It's interesting because he's a little bit of both now, right? Because he's got the rough edge to him. But if he was completely different, if he was his dad, he wouldn't be helping Switch at all.
Yeah.
Right. So he's landed somewhere in the middle. He's been roughed up, but not completely lost.
It's going to be interesting to discover who Hadrian is at this point, because he's been through a lot, and we're seeing a new Hadrian emerge, right?
Yep.
We had young, idealistic Hadrian on Delos, who's, angsty and will not live up to the ideals that his father does because his values disagree. Then he had to give up all of those values just to survive for 2 years and was hopeless of a future, right? He now is somebody who is coming out of that. Basically, Cat's death is a rebirth for Hadrian himself. And so this is the first time that we really get to see this new Hadrian in action and see which values have withstood the test of what he's gone through over these past few years. Gen then starts going ballistic on everyone, particularly Hadrian and Switch too, because he feels like he's being lorded over. I mean, Hadrian at this moment is still using terms like Cyril, right? So he's still calling, out the fact that he is Palatine or of higher blood than everybody else in every conversation that he has.
Yeah.
And Gen makes fun of him for it. But he then goes ballistic on everybody in the room, saying this is the worst group that he has had. And we don't know how long he's been in here. It's been an indeterminate period of time, but he's been around a while. But this is clearly Gen being scared that his time might be up. Part of it related to everybody else and having seen people die and know what it's like, but also part of it over the idea that he probably is scared every time he goes out there. It's not unrealistic to think that
Absolutely
going in blood sport like this would scare you. They are in this hypogeum, which if you look at the lexicon, it basically says this is an underground facility in most cases. It literally means underground in Greek, but it's a tomb or a temple in the Greek itself. In this case, the hypogeum is specifically linked to Colosso or different facilities that lie underground. But in particular, this one here, because of the geography of Borisivo, because it's built on a marshy atoll, it isn't really below ground. So it's kind of an oxymoron that he calls it a hypogeum, even though it's above ground. It's that's such a little thing that Rocchio throws in there just to show, yeah, I know my Greek and my, I appreciated the world building consistency there.
Yeah.
We find out that he is going by a different name, right? The first time we're hearing of him. Now, when you read this, did you say Had or Hade? Because I audiobooked it, and that's what the audiobook says is Hade.
So when I read it for the first time, I read Had, but a lot of the folks that I've heard say this say Hade. And frankly, if you're shortening Hadrian, I could totally see someone saying Hade. Like, I don't know why, it just, the way that my brain worked, it did that. But I think it's actually supposed to be Hade, is my feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, that being said, Rocchio is particular about names. Maybe we should ask him that at some point in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Actually had of Teucros, and that
after he's returned from the depths of the writing. Yes.
Yeah. But we find out that he is going by Hade of Teucros. So he's not saying where he's from. He's shortening his fancy name, because every time that he's brought up the name Hadrian in the situations in the street, he has been met with this immediate distrust of, you are not one of us. And like, clearly he is not. He's pale, he's tall, whatever.
Yeah.
But now he's got a shaved head and is just like any other myrmidon in comparison to him where we saw him at the beginning of the Borisivo arc to where he is now is very different in his demeanor. He's starting to realize some self-awareness after 2 to 3 years on the streets.
After many, many times of touching the hot stove, he's decided that it's hot when he touches it.
Hadrian remarks that he's expecting weathered, leathery veterans to be fighting with, but rather he feels like he's on the island of misfit toys, these sad, starving people that have made the choice, either willingly or unwillingly, to give their lives up in Colosso. But it is ironic, the fact that this is his seed of hope. This way of life is his only way out that he is stuck to, despite the fact that he was so distasteful of the whole practice on Delos. He finds himself in the pits as his only sort of way out. And he even remarks the fact that his dad would think, oh, he's not even a proper gladiator. He's a myrmidon. He's fighting on the myrmidon side.
It is an interesting thing that this story is really started in Colosso. we get some introduction to Hadrian, but he is really the action begins as he scorns Colosso and leaves, and now the way he's going to have to climb himself back out is through the same means he once condemned. There's an interesting circular nature to that is a good sort of storytelling thing. It poses interesting quandaries about Hadrian.
I think metaphorically, it points to the idea of adulthood, right? The death of adolescence into adulthood, I mean, which we've mentioned before. But in particular, the idea that your ideals, the moment you're faced with real life or any sort of strife, go by the wayside. At this moment, he's just been on the street for 2 to 3 years, and it's the most natural way in his brain at this moment that he's
Right.
latched onto of getting out of that. So his idealism be damned. And actually, maybe it is a little bit more idealistic for him to fight on the myrmidon side compared to the gladiator side. Even in the last chapter, I think the doctor remarks the fact that she's surprised that he's not trying out to be a gladiator because of his blood. Part of it is, we know he didn't want his blood tested. The other part could be, well, I want to be a man of the people to some extent. Because we have to think too, in world, he has already at multiple times tried to let us know his thoughts about the Palatine caste and how he thinks that the lower people are more human than him. So maybe this is him trying to tie himself along with those people as well.
Yeah, I don't think Hadrian could tolerate being a gladiator.
No.
Just like mowing people down, I don't think he could actually do it at this point.
Yeah. He's not Crispin.
Yeah, he's just not. He wouldn't do it. So even if it were the opportunity, I don't think he would take that route. This is sort of like he's participating in Colosso, but on the side with the less cruelty.
Yeah.
As a part of it. Yeah.
Gen is continuing this tirade in front of everybody else, trying to, bring the mood down. Meanwhile, Switch tries to lighten up the situation. Rarely, this is the one time that we see Switch try and brighten the mood. But Gen just makes fun of the fact that he spent most of his past as a prostitute and manhandles him, bullies him, grabs him by the throat. And the moment that he does that, Hadrian finds his cue, right? Like he realizes that was his cue, sort of turns on his mother's side and begins laughing in the middle of this awkward silence. I can picture this scene very vividly in my mind of Hadrian just like in the middle of this awkward silence, just so out there over the top. And then, of course, he again wheels on Hadrian seeing this because it's like, the F are you doing? Hadrian makes fun of him and says, "Oh, I thought you were putting your hands on him because you were lonely." And then everybody in the group laughs because the implications of that. Hadrian knows what he's doing in this situation. Even though he's acting and being melodramatic, he knows what he's doing. He is baiting the bully, right? Just like he has done with Crispin thousands and thousands of times, we can imagine. Gen draws his sword. Hadrian continues to use words to offset Gen, and he goads him. And then the moment the fighting starts, he dominates him, like steps out the way, steps out that way, gets around the side, shows how quick he is in comparison, and then literally kicks Gen's ass and knocks him over.
A point of interest too, right before this fight starts, is that Hadrian casually mentions, right as this is about to happen, that he still doesn't know how many years he was in Fugue. Just as an update, he still has not found an imperial star date. We still don't have any sense of orientation, although we have some progress on how am I going to get out of the situation. We still don't know what's happened in terms of how long he's been away. Important. Yeah. It's good he mentions that. So we still we're taking a step, but we're not oriented yet.
In addition to that, too, he remarks as well that despite the fact that he is still off kilter and offset, that the muscle memory hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
And even though he's been in Fugue for at least 13 years, we really don't know how long, he still has the muscle memory of him fighting for years and years, a decade and a half, are coming back to him as he's practicing over the last 2 weeks.
Interesting. This, I think, is maybe the first sort of fair fight Hadrian has had that hasn't been against another Palatine, because he had the fight where he was outnumbered in the street. So it's sort of not a fair fight. He's getting beat up there. He had a fair fight with Crispin. He did kind of clock his brother across the head. It's a cheap shot. But since then, he's had like some confrontations where he's been like starving to death and wounded and stuff. We get like a fresh Hadrian versus a combat guy here. And so feel like this is the first like real display of Hadrian actually knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And he's good at this. And it's not just because he's fighting his brother and he knows it's his brother's younger than him. He actually is quick and a smart fighter and knows his way around these situations. So he truly could be competent here in Colosso.
This is setting stuff up for later in the series. We know that Hadrian fights the Cielcen at some point, right? We know that he lasts the entire story. So he has to be good at war, right? He ended the war. He has to be good at it. This is the first indication of him. I mean, not this in particular, but up to this point, we've had discussions, examples with Crispin, his dad mentioning the fact that he should be the one in Colosso. He hears that he's the better sword fighter. Now we're actually getting to see that played out outside of the family grounds.
Yeah.
And he is the best that's here. No question. Part of that inherently has to be genetics, but the other part of it is diligent training for the majority of his life.
Yeah.
I mean, he trained with Felix every day.
Yeah. There's a comfort that's interesting here too. You know, he sort of describes the situation as, you know, Gen swings at him and says like he could like cleaved my head in half, but I'm just like saw it coming from a million miles away, just stepped out of the way. So like there's a comfort in combat that he's describing here that sort of comes with experience of all of the training that he's done live, not just practicing forms or anything like this, like live training that was emphasized very early in the book. So he still has that. He's still like totally capable of remaining calm and acting in this way. I feel like Rocchio writes action very well, and we're going to start getting more of that now. It's a fun sequence.
He then, after having beaten Gen to the ground, he's pointing his training sword at him and then goes on this, channeling his mother, goes on this rhetorical, inspirational speech that I'd like to read. This is on page 225. So I held my blade threateningly beside Gen's face as he lay quiescent. Instead of addressing the beaten man, he was only a symptom. I raised my voice, calling on hundreds of hours of oratory training at Gibson's hand. Would you divide our strength when we need it most? Like my father, I let my eyes strafe over the crowd, fully aware of what I was doing and who I was emulating. My heart going leaden in my chest. But I was not my father. I did not want them to fear me. The faces of the recruits watching me, men and women as new to this as I was, were jaundiced with the same skin-tightened expression of fear I'd observed moments before. People are expecting to watch us all die. You! I pointed at a young woman with pale hair, her skin red across and peeling in the sun, nearly obscuring the word thief tattooed across her forehead. And you, and you, and you, and me! I struck my chest with my fist in imitation of a salute. I aim to disappoint them. So he is clearly trying to be this inspirational figure to this group.
Like a leader character. And I think this is so interesting because he does not like the ethics of his father, but there's a cool thing that's happening here, which is that he's integrating pieces of his dad that are productive, right? So the immature person says, my parents are stupid, they're overbearing, and they do too much, and so I'm just going to do everything the opposite my parents do. I don't like my parents. The mature way to learn is to pick and choose and integrate things appropriately and selectively, right? So because his dad is capable, the problem is not that his dad is capable, the problem is his dad is cruel, and his dad doesn't have to be cruel to be capable. And so he's sort of taking pieces from his father that are actually productive and leaving the cruelty aside as much as he's able to, even though he's rough around the edges now. He's still not his dad, even though he's channeling his dad here, which is an interesting sort of path to weave for Rocchio. But I think it really works because this is like, right again, along with this sort of coming of age theme that this book has, is testing the ethics of the immature, slowly sort of taking a path, and then how do we integrate some true stuff without completely giving into the authoritarian tendencies of the world or whatever. So really interesting. Also, I aim to disappoint them is just sick. It's just cool.
Yeah.
It's just cool.
Aura farming.
Yeah, just aura farming. It's great.
To your point about Alistair and Hadrian and the integration, it's interesting to me that this harder edged Hadrian doesn't feel the guilt that he had felt previously in the story when using his father's tactics.
Yeah.
Right? If you remember, back when he was using his father's tactics at the at the penthouse on Delos, and he felt bad about it temporarily or whatever, or with the guild factionarius or whatever it may be. There was this pang of guilt that he sort of had in using those tactics to get what he wants. That's gone now. That integration has happened, and he recognizes, at least in hindsight, when he's writing the story, that he's using the same tactics as his father, but the values that underlie those tactics are completely different.
It's as if he's gone into the world. He's had enough of a dose of reality to realize that his dad had a point in some ways, but he's leaving aside the parts that are still inappropriate because the world isn't all bad. It's just you need something to be oppositional and assertive in the world. You don't have to be cruel or authoritarian, but you do have to be authoritative, right? And he started to do that. I sort of missed this sort of character development that gradually happens on a first read, and it's coming through a lot clearer as you sort of define what Hadrian is doing in each of these arcs. And we're really landing in this integration and section where he's sort of coming back to life in a certain way as a new person. It's great.
I did want to point out something that I think is, if true, it's a genius Easter egg. If not, then I'm just a psychopath, or I'm crazy conspiracy theory Charlie from It's Always Sunny brain. I wonder if the word thief on this girl's forehead, because it's in all caps, and every single one of the crimes that have been written on the foreheads of these different people have been in all caps. But I wonder if this was the whole purpose behind that world building thing. I want to know if Rocchio played Link's Awakening on the Game Boy when he was growing up. Because in that game, it's the one Zelda game in which you can, I don't know if there's another one where you can, but regardless, in this Zelda game is the first one where you could steal things from the shop.
Okay.
So you can walk behind the shopkeeper's back and get out. And if you go back, he'll kill you, like he'll zap you or whatever. But if you do that, then your name changes from whatever you had put it in, Link or Drew or Cameron, to Thief in all caps for the rest of the game. So if you steal from the shopkeeper, you are labeled thief for the rest of the game. And if that was the reason why he came up with this whole world building thing on why criminals have this tattooed thing across,
bro,
that would be amazing.
Listen, okay, this is the most far-fetched thing I've heard.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, if that ends up correct, the podcast was worth it, because that is that is the most insane thing.
I know.
If that gets confirmed, I mean, you're just like shooting from half court on that. But if it lands, I will personally buy you a beer. There we go. That's crazy.
We need to, I plan on, Rocchio is currently in writing the new series.
As he should be.
We don't want to bother him, as he should be. But when he sort of peeks his head up, I do want, and hopefully we're done with Empire of Silence by that time, I want a list of compiled questions that are interesting that he hasn't already been asked. That will be one of them. So we should probably start compiling a list.
It will be worth it for two reasons, right? It will be worth it if it's right. It will be amazing, and if it's wrong, the look on his face will be great. That's the what? That's very confabulatory. But wow, okay.
But regardless, back to the actual action. He's trying to inspire this group, and people from the crowd, veterans, remark at the fact that, oh, this is awfully brave words coming from somebody that hasn't actually fought in Colosso. One guy cries out to him, "You don't have the gravitas for a command, son." And then Hadrian's like, "Gravitas, that's a big word there, buddy." He changes tact at this moment. This is the first time that, going along with the integration of not only his previous self, but of his new experiences and his ability to recognize his audience better than he had before, he sort of changes tact here. He doesn't use fancy words. He's like, "I don't have fancy words for you. That's a fancy word. I don't have fancy words for it. I have desperate words. I don't want to die." So he's changing. It's a genius rhetorical thing from his standpoint, flipping that on the guy, but also showing us that this person, this Hadrian, is a more self-aware Hadrian than we've seen. Going from there, we hear about a one-eyed vet named Polino who tells him, like, "Shut up," from like the corner. And this isn't the last time we'll hear from Polino. Hadrian goads Polino on, but Polino doesn't take the bait.
There's a couple of veteran whatever stereotypes for the veteran Colosso. Gen is almost like the sort of bully, like hazing the newcomer kind of vet. And then Polino, with this sort of reserved nature, feels like the more vet that is the one that tells the vet who's too bullied, cut the shit, man. He's like,
Yeah.
feels like that guy who even Gen is like, all right, yeah, but even with such a small introduction, there's a hierarchy here. Polino feels like top dog in this circumstance.
And it's smart for him from his standpoint not to talk very much, but it's clear when he does talk, people listen. You're right.
Yes, yeah.
Gen remarks at how fast Hade is in this moment. Hadrian, I didn't mention earlier, but the fact that he is Palatine, a lot of people have taken to calling him, and Gen in particular, to calling him your radiance.
Yeah.
And like, like blowing it smoke up his butt to make him the butt of the joke for being so high and mighty, using Syrah and all this different stuff. Hadrian turns it back on him and says, that's your radiance to you.
Yeah.
when he mentions the speed. At which point Gen sort of laughs.
What's awesome is, Gen is on the floor after being kicked down, and this whole speech happens, and Hadrian gives him the hand. This is a respect moment between Gen and Hadrian here, where there's a sense in which banter and fights and stuff like that can be a part of a culture like this. Yeah. And the momentum flips here to where now, as Hadrian gives him a hand and he's bantering with him, if Gen gets upset now, he actually almost loses socially. Like the winning move is actually to start just bantering back and just take the hand and like just make an offhand comment like, oh man, you're really fat. Like, because now they're kind of comrades a little bit here. They're starting to build some rapport, even though, they have their differences. Gen concedes a little bit here in order to sort of win some social points back. It's an interesting moment, this winning of respect kind of feel with Gen.
Which is interesting, and I think feels appropriate for this sort of locker room training esque sequence.
Definitely.
And realistic. And also sort of subverts the idea that Gen is 100% a bully and like fragile because of it. Right. He's not as fragile as we would expect a bully character to be.
He's not a dysregulated, angry moron. Yeah. Right. He's just rough around the edges.
Really rough.
Right. I can't even imagine being the guy who goes into these situations and has been through a bunch of, like what that would do.
He's a criminal too, right?
Yep.
He didn't do something big enough to warrant a tattoo on his forehead. Both him and Siren both don't have tattoos on their foreheads, according to what the book says here. But they are criminals. They have their nostrils slit. So they're not the good guys. Hadrian then takes Switch aside to work on his footwork. We are let in on the fact that their first match is going to be within a week. Hadrian remarks that he misses like swordplay, practicing his swordplay. He really appreciated that disciplined part of his life. And that's true. I mean, discipline and working out is good for mental health, and he has sort of not had the ability to do that. And this was the primary way that he did that for so long. And in particular, martial arts brings about a sort of calmness to the anxiety that is, I'd say, different than your average exercise.
There's also a passion to the detail and the technique that is sort of hard to replicate. And there's something really joyful about an experience of getting very good at something and like getting very technical with it. You can get very inspired and excited about things like that. And martial arts is one of these things that combines a lot of things in that way. It's got the interest and intrigue and grinding to make a technique better, but also it's exercise. It's like a lot of things all at once. Yeah. And you can imagine missing that and just like feeling a sword in your hand again and just be like, oh, it feels good to be doing this again.
Getting back on the mats, whatever it may be.
Oh yeah, and teaching someone new and the whole thing, it's great.
Yeah, very blue belt energy coming from Hadrian in this moment.
Yeah, for sure. My gosh.
But we end chapter 34, teaching Switch, and then we begin chapter 35, proper men. So it's the night before his match.
Yeah.
And it's sort of an interesting parallel to the Garden of Gethsemane, right? He can't sleep, so he gets up, he's walking around. I did want to bring up the idea that fighters, in particular the best fighters, I think of one in particular, George St. Pierre, who is, many people argue, the greatest or one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time, mentions the fact that every night before a fight is immense stress, like hard to sleep. You can't, like you're going to war the next day. You don't know how you're going to come out on the other side. That's the vibe that we're getting here. And it's a good thing because GSP also mentions that the one time that he slept like a baby was the one time that he got knocked out by Matt Serra. Like that was the one time he had a good night's sleep before a fight. And then he got punished for it.
I really have a growing appreciation for this section, just for the way he describes the anxiety around fighting. I don't know why I haven't heard a ton of or read a lot of reading like this. It's obviously a different degree, but I've done the going to bed the night before a wrestling tournament in high school, and it is kind of a unique stress experience for people that haven't experienced before. When we get to the next chapter, I'll even double down on this as he describes it. It's so interesting to me that he very, very accurately captures the experience of what is the psychology of someone who is anticipating something like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to manage. You've got him, walking around trying to get his mind on something else. And it's just so difficult because, when we're thinking about anxiety and stress and these things, we can try to reframe things and stuff. But that's most effective when the anxiety or fear is irrational and we can sort of talk ourselves out of it because we're having a cognitive misunderstanding. It's perfectly rational to be anxious and anticipating something this disastrous in the future. So the only real solution is really to just try to distract yourself. That's all you have, is trying to do anything you can to not think about what's about to happen and be in the now when it's not happening yet. And it's portrayed very well in this chapter. And it's really well done. I really appreciate it, actually. It's a accurate representation of the way this happens.
The reason I mentioned that it's similar to the Garden of Gethsemane is that he feels like a prisoner that is on death row hoping for a pardon. And he literally kind of is in this situation, right? He is potentially going to his death tomorrow.
Yeah.
We don't know what will happen yet. I mean, we know as the reader, we don't know, or Hadrian doesn't know in the moment. I wanted to read the section on page 229 that begins with, "If you have ever awakened in the dead of night and questioned the cosmos down to the space between its atoms, you will know how I felt. In my dread and in the sickness of my heart, even the flesh of my own two hands seemed alien. I found myself thinking of the morrow's combat, my first, but I could not dwell on it, and I would retreat to some other memory, to my mother's operas, to tales of Simeon the Red and Carnsegara, to Gibson's lessons, to sparring matches with Crispin, to Cat's smile in our time in that abandoned tenement. I remember the pain of broken ribs in the night when Rells's thugs had dragged me from my cardboard hutch in the streets of Borseba." That's a really good description of what you're describing, right? The anxiety leading to sort of a numbness in the hands is severe, right? I've felt that sort of level of anxiety before.
Mm-hmm.
More than once, not necessarily in with disastrous consequences of death lingering, but
right.
It's indicating the fight or flight sort of feeling that one gets, or the anticipatory anxiety that one can get, and that everybody is used to. Night before a test, night before you go back to work. I used to travel Monday through Thursday every week, and I had mostly early flights Monday morning. I had a really hard time going to sleep on Sunday night in anticipation of waking up and then going to work somewhere else.
There's another line that's on just at the first page that I think is really interesting, that's sort of right along this theme, is it didn't seem real, death. None of it did. And he goes to talk about how nothing feels real.
Yeah.
There's sometimes this sense of like derealization that happens with intense stress, where it literally feels like things don't feel like they're actually happening. You get a sense from some people that it goes through serious extreme circumstances like, this can't be happening to me. There's an actual sensation like this is actually not happening. When I compete in jiu-jitsu tournaments and when I fight, I often feel that way while I'm fighting. It feels very not real most of the time until I'm like in a very like dominant winning position or something like that. Like right as you're stepping up to fight someone, it feels like you're watching a movie in your own head or something like that. It doesn't feel like the same as any other experience I've ever had. So it's super relatable. I've never stepped into a Coliseum. I can't even imagine the anticipation and the feeling that would evoke. But that's totally accurate. It's exactly what it feels like when you're in a situation like this. Like this, it can't be happening. Like it's so hard to comprehend the thing that's going to happen tomorrow. Like I can't imagine being in that circumstance.
And with that realization of death feeling unreal, at the same time, he's sort of getting this moment where his life is flashing before his eyes. Not fully like you hear described in some situations, but his mind is going to the points in time that we have thought about or that we've seen on the page in order, in sequence. So in some respects, his life is kind of flashing before his eyes in this moment, but not necessarily like playing out like the movie
Right.
you would expect necessarily. As he's walking around the hypogeo, he hears the showers on and he goes over there and hears first he's like, I hear noises back there. He's just wondering what's going on. It's the noise of somebody crying. So he finds that Switch is bawling in the shower stall and sort of Hadrian announces that he's there. It's like, hey, who's there? Switch, says it's me. He can't sleep either. Hadrian empathizes with him in this moment, like, hey, I'm feeling the same way as you.
Yeah.
But then sort of in hindsight, loses credibility when trying to make Switch more hopeful, saying that, like, I had the opportunity to be in Colosso, but I've never done it before. So he's losing credibility in this moment, which doesn't help Switch because he immediately realizes that I'm going to die. I'm going to be the one that's going to die in there. And when he says this, Switch is emotionless. This is he's not crying anymore. It's just this deadpan, resolved, given up. This is what Gen was hoping for. And at that moment, Switch regrets not renewing his contract with his former boss, right? He regrets leaving the life that he had because he thinks that he's going to die, which is really, really sad because he didn't have that good of a life before. I mean,
really
he was
bad.
Yeah, he was a sex slave. Let's call a spade a spade. And
Terrible.
Gen has sort of gotten to him at this point because now Switch believes that he is only good at being a whore, right? Like he says that explicitly. Hadrian, trying to lighten the mood in this moment, jokes about the fact that his sword work is terrible, but it doesn't help. I mean, imagine like it's really cheesy. I mean, lightening the mood to some extent, but Hadrian is not helping that much in this moment.
It's really hard. Gallows humor kind of stuff, it works for some people. For other people, it does. For some people, it like saves them, right? It's the thing that gets them through.
Gallows humor at work is one thing. Gallows humor when you're literally going to the gallows the next day is something different, right?
I get that, but I think it gets its name from the fact that...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, who knows? I don't feel that it lands with Switch.
No, but Hadrian says that he thinks that he'll be fine. And then internally wonders how long Switch could have been a prostitute because he can't be more than 18 years old. It is an interesting juxtaposition based on Hadrian's internal ethics and the ethics of the world that he mentions the fact that prostitution is honest work. That stuck out to me because it's legal, right? It is legal in the empire. And so technically it is honest work. But that also buffers up against Hadrian's values because he then realizes very quickly as he starts going down this ethical rabbit hole here that Switch was most likely sold into this as a kid, which is by his parents, which would be awful.
Yeah.
I mean, we see that unfortunately that happens in our world today still.
Terrible.
But it reinforces Hadrian's sexual ethic, which is something that we have lauded him for up to this point.
I hadn't considered
being against the world.
I hadn't considered that, but it's actually interesting that we have a character like this here because, we have Crispin earlier in the series just like, yo, let's go to the harem, bro. He's just like doing this stuff. But we get a male character in Switch that's sort of a victim of this system. And it does reinforce that, we get the fact that this character, he's in Colosso, risking his life trying to get away from that.
Yeah.
And, it gives us a sort of, I would say, an accurate picture of like what this kind of a life would actually look like, what lengths you would go to get out of it. So you're right, it does reinforce all of that. We were seeing the victim of the system that they're in regarding sex and the ethic of the culture that they're in.
He does ask Switch how he ended up deciding to go to Colosso. Switch mentions that he just wanted a change of scenery. Like he really wanted to get off world, but he can't pilot a ship and he can't really work the hydroponics on ships. So he can't grow food and he can't fly and he couldn't afford passage on any ship anywhere. So he figured he might as well go learn to fight. And he sheepishly admits that he wanted to fight like Cassius Sullier or Prince Cyrus.
I will say my ears immediately perked up at this section because of, what stuck out to me with Kat and Hadrian's connection initially was their share of wonder for the world and for getting off planet and what's out there. What's interesting, my ears perked up because this is very similar to Hadrian's love and inspiration of stories.
Yeah.
Hadrian laughs not because he thinks it's ridiculous, but he laughs because it's so similar to his vision of being Simeon the Red. So they have this really authentic connection point now. So it feels like this is sort of a springboard for a friendship of some kind, essentially, because they have the people that Hadrian has latched onto have some really relatable trait that connects to some central core part of his identity.
Okay, so Cassius Sullier is a privateer admiral in the Foundation War who is often the subject of modern adventure films in universe. So this is sort of a mythical, I imagine a Revolutionary War-esque type, but also privateer, meaning like a pirate. So like
It's like a
a
Han
good
Solo.
Han Solo, Blackbeard, but not quite as bad, I guess, that kind
Yeah.
of person. And then Prince Cyrus is also referred to as Prince Cyrus the Golden and Prince Cyrus the Fool. His story often involves the telling of his time with Princess Amana. We will talk more about this later in the series, but his story has to do with how Jad became Jad. So we'll save that for now. Maybe we'll return to Prince Cyrus. But these figures are, like you mentioned, Indiana Jones-esque.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford would play Cassius Sullier for sure. And maybe Jason Momoa would play Prince Cyrus.
Prince Cyrus, that'd be sick. I'd watch that.
Maybe. But again, which is indicating at this moment that he wanted to be like movie stars, essentially, be able to fight like movie stars. He really is indicating here that he wants the ability to stand up and protect himself because he is vulnerable.
Yeah.
And he's put in vulnerable situations very often.
Great catch, because Hadrian latches on to Simeon because he wants something, he wants to explore, he wants to escape the chains of his position and to experience and cooperate with Xenobites and stuff like that. And then Switch latches on to the idea of being capable and be able to protect. And that's a great catch. It sort of speaks to their personalities for which characters they've latched onto.
Yeah.
Sort of actually speaks to, broader human psychology, but like, why do we connect with characters specifically? Why are specific people that we read in novels stand out to us? So great insight.
Hadrian, like you said, mentions the fact that he wanted to be Simeon the Red.
Yeah.
And Switch is put off by this, being like, he wasn't a fighter. Why would you want to be Simeon the Red? And Hadrian said, no, he wasn't a fighter, but he became one when he had to be. And so he uses that tact to say, it doesn't matter what you are, it just matters who you are essentially in the moment that you have to, like, who can you become in the moment of crisis?
I love this line. It doesn't matter what you are, Switch. You have to stand when the time comes. And the time is coming. I love it. And this is probably not what's happening with, actually, I know this is not what's happening with Christopher, because I don't think Christopher's read any Stephen King. But this idea of making a stand is a very Stephen King thing. He's got a book called The Stand, right? This is almost like something he took from Old Crow, where it's like this behavioral ethic. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, where you've been. It matters where you're going, what you're going to do. When you have the opportunity to just stand here and do something with who you are and what you can. It's another thing he's sort of integrating into himself. It's great.
For us, Old Crow was just a few chapters ago. For Hadrian, it has been years since he met Old Crow. And so he's probably pondering that ethic more and more, like the moment that he sort of he mentioned that he thought of Old Crow on that rooftop. He's probably thought about that conversation a lot.
Yeah.
Over the last few weeks.
That's why he remembers it, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Despite all his best efforts, and despite the fact that they are happy about the pay potentially being decent, they recognize that they won't be able to collect the full sum of their pay until their contract is up. And Switch is, at the end of this conversation, still hopeless. But we get a Gibsonism. And in this case, it's interesting, that Gibson had been this mentor figure for Hadrian and gotten him out of the dumps when he thought his life was over going to the Chantry. Cat has done that for him, and now he is doing that for Switch. In this moment, he says, "Don't worry about hope. Hope is a cloud," which is an interesting quote when you really think about it. But he's trying to be that light to Switch, like Gibson and Cat were to him in his moments of deepest despair. And we don't get an indication that like everything's good again, because uh, you know, Switch doesn't have that immediate turnaround, but
Yeah.
that's more realistic because that's not the way it works. And in that moment, to sort of take his mind off of, the immediate upcoming, and maybe because it's the last time that they'll get the opportunity to, Hadrian asks about what his plan is after Colosso. Like, contract is up. What are you doing next?
Yeah.
Switch says, I don't know. He's got a blank stare. And then Hadrian realizes that he's got no plan and no ambition. Just a dumb, vague hope and a childish fancy, not unlike some other young man I knew. Is he pointing to himself here in this really self-aware moment?
Yeah.
A dumb, vague hope and a childish fancy. Wow, we are seeing growth from Hadrian.
Yeah.
We are seeing some real growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's sort of looking at his younger self right now, is my experience. Yeah.
And he extends symbolically to his younger self, and to Switch in particular in real life, a hand and an offer to stick together. When the going gets tough, Hadrian doesn't have any friends here yet. And Hadrian does have a plan. Hadrian is planning on saving up for a ship. And the moment that he is done, when the year is up, Switch will know how to fight, and they'll be able to, he'll be able to be security on this ship. I'll hire you. And so he's giving Switch not only a job in the future, but he's also trying to bring him out. If you get somebody in this depressive mode to look forward to something, the likelihood that they'll do something drastic and self-harming is lower, right? So he's trying to invoke that here. And Hadrian mentions the fact that he's doing this for Switch because he cannot bear seeing this hopelessness that he's just coming out of over the last 2 weeks, right? He can't see anyone go through that, and so he's wanting to take that away from Switch. And in that moment, Switch is like, I thought you told me not to hope like 2 seconds ago. He's like, I didn't tell you that. I said hope is a cloud, which basically is saying like, okay, it's
What do you think hope is a cloud means?
I've been thinking about it a lot since reading it.
I have a thought, but I'm curious because it
Yeah,
took
go
me
ahead.
I think it means that hope is fleeting, like
Yeah.
emotionally. I think the idea is, so our experience of hope is like sort of like, I think, our experience with happiness in some sense, that we can have an experience of hope being like coming in and feeling very hopeful sometimes and feeling very hopeless at other times. Just as the weather changes, it sort of comes and goes in the same way we feel happy. But I think that the nail is driven home with Hadrian saying this at the end, is that hope is always there. It's just our experience with it is fleeting. It's like, it comes and goes sort of seemingly randomly sometimes, but it is always there. If you look for it, you find it. It just doesn't feel hopeful all the time. I think that's kind of roughly what it is you don't need to feel hopeful to know that there's hope. It's just in the same way that you can be sort of joyful or grateful even when you're unhappy for the moment, right? So
I wonder if this is because it could have multiple meanings in
definitely.
like, I wonder if this is a Gibson specific quote or if this is something like dealing with the apatheia, right? Like of a Scholiast trying to get off of their, emotions, like
Oh,
to
I
drop their
see.
emotions.
Yeah.
So the inverse could be hope is a cloud. You can't rely too much on it. You have to center and focus yourself, and that will get you through whatever moment. Would
I
be
see.
this sort of stoic answer to that, right?
Yeah.
And albeit one that is less hopeful, but it's interesting to see. I think you're right. Ultimately, that's the ethic that Gibson would have in the moment, that if you look hard enough, hope is going to be there, and hope is ever present, and it is fleeting, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That rings truer to me than what I just said, but it does make me think of what the inverse, like if the inverse is also kind of true.
Yeah. Good chapter. I really feel connected to Switch after this one. Switch sort of jumps off the page in the last chapter, and I really feel attached to him after this one in the same way that Hadrian does.
In I don't think I recognized at this moment how much Hadrian is trying to be a good friend to Switch on my first read through. He just seemed like, all right, I'm just going to try and, do the right thing with this guy. Upon a closer examination, he is really trying to actively be a better person based on his experience with Gibson and Cat. And he's trying to give that to Switch in this moment,
Yep.
even if Switch doesn't give him anything in return, right? This is purely out of the goodness of his heart. And I appreciate Switch more upon a second read through than I did on the initial.
Yeah, me too.
But that's where the chapter ends, and we begin chapter 36, the longest chapter of today's episode. But luckily for us, it's a lot of action.
A lot of plot. Yep.
Teach them how to war. So we get this vision. And again, this is the Gladiator portion of the book, like Gladiator, the movie portion of the book. And so they are in the back of Colosso. They're on this big platform and it's being lifted up to stop in this stadium, right? Switch next to Hadrian is praying a chantry prayer to an icon of fortitude, which is interesting. There are 20 myrmidons around on this platform. So we know that the team that they're working with, and the current plan is that this 20 myrmidons will split into 4 groups of 5 in the upcoming battle. I did think it was interesting that if we look at Switch's prayer to fortitude, he's asking for courage, right?
Yeah.
And Hadrian calls out, and this is a really practical thing that he says here. He says, the prayer that Switch says is, bless me with the sword of your courage, O fortitude. Grant me strength in this time of need. Bless me with the sword. You could just sort of envision Hadrian closing his eyes and like rolling them and saying, courage is the first virtue of fools, the patron of those too afraid to run. That's a really cynical and yet practical thing to say for Hadrian.
I thought about it for like a couple of minutes when I read that line, because it's really interesting, because it initially caught me off guard, because it sort of portrays courage in a negative light, but the sentence also says that courage is still a virtue. It's just the first virtue of fools. So it's interesting that courage can, if it's the only virtue you have, may actually hurt you. Because if you're foolish, your courage will just get you killed, right? So it's interesting because you need to have virtues in equal measure in some sense, right? You need to be deliberate and discerning as well as brave, right?
Yeah.
Because to just be brave means you just run headfirst into a wood chipper. Like it doesn't solve any problems. It just gets you hurt faster. Sometimes it makes sense to tactically retreat and regroup and do these things, but if your only eye is forward because you're not scared, then that just gets you hurt. So it's a really fascinating line. I think it's awesome.
For a small line in the midst of this whole section, it really stands out.
Yeah.
Especially because it feels in this moment sort of counter to who we know Hadrian to be. That being said, this could be narrator Hadrian imposing this on the past. So it's something we should keep an eye out for when he's faced with a moment of whether or not to stay or run. What does Hadrian decide to do? Hadrian mentions that they are arrayed with swords and spears and carbon fiber hoplons, which hoplite is a soldier in Greece, right? We've mentioned that before. But hoplons, think of the shield from 300, if you've seen that film, the sort of large Grecian circular shield used for phalanx and stuff like that. That's what they're arrayed with. Hadrian, although having just spent the end of the last chapter trying to bring Switch's spirits up immediately as this elevator is going, it's like, this guy's totally going to die. The moment he gets out there, he's totally going to die. He's totally not ready for this. He was right. He's not going to be a swordsman. And while that's happening, Lino, amidst the din that is rising as they get higher and higher up, is giving out orders. So back to what you had said before, the feeling of what Polino is, this grizzled vet is the one who is being listened to as they're about to go into battle, which means that he's top dog.
I also love the moment where Hadrian is like, tab Switch is like, hey man, at least we got shields.
Yeah.
It's like
shut up, Hadrian.
Switch is like, that is not funny at all, bro.
Yeah. We're about to die. Do you not understand that?
Yeah.
Polino clearly has been around long enough to know the different teams of gladiators too.
Yeah.
So he knows that this team, Jaffa's team or whatever, is known for throwing javelins, because he gets asked on what they're going to be arrayed in. And he says, it's going to be the same stuff that we wear, right? It's going to be, swords, spears, shields, that kind of thing. But to your point, the myrmidons are not outfitted with Royce shields. So they are open to
Yeah.
potential high
Yeah.
velocity fire. Hadrian then has a doubtful moment as this thing is rising up. He is doubting why he decided to do this versus any other way to find it. There must have been some other way to get what he wanted, but then steals his resolve, saying, I'm doing this for my ship. I'm doing
Yeah.
this for my ship. I'm doing this for my ship.
This is another one of these moments that it really accurately portrays the anxiety of this. He says, my bowels twisted to knots, the blood hammered against the anvil of my skull. When you're approaching something, at least my experience, when I'm like, especially when I was first starting as a wrestler, I have a very nervous stomach. Anytime I'm about to fight or anything like that, it's just like, you don't have to go to the bathroom. You don't have to do any of this, but your stomach is just like killing you.
Yeah.
And you can, when you're very anxious in these situations, what I used to be in situations in the hospital where there was like someone being violent and like we were about to have to like restrain somebody because they were hurting on another person, that you could feel the blood pumping in your face. Like you could feel it pounding in your skull when you're in situations like this. It's very accurate for when you're approaching a dangerous situation. It's like your entire body is just on fire. I believe it's doing weird things like pumping blood to extremities and stuff like that to try to prepare you for an emergency, which causes interesting physical responses. So very accurate. You lose fine motor skills, all sorts of strange stuff that creates a unique physical reaction, and it's exactly like this. So it's awesome. I appreciate a realistic negative portrayal of the action. We have this brave main character who's like kind of a nervous wreck about to step into the situation.
He's not, to the point, courage is the first virtue of fools.
Right. Yes.
He, in the moment that doubt creeps in, though, he does a good thing too of focusing on the reason behind why he's doing this to sort of center himself and take away the anxiety. So and at that moment, his dreams sort of open back up to him of like, he could be a privateer, he could be a merchanter. Like the moment he has a ship and is able to be off planet, the options are endless for him. And so he focuses on, I'm doing this to get money for my ship. And that sort of centers him back away from the doubt that has crept in. We find out the specifics of his contract in this moment. So the way that these contracts appear to go is for a year long, and it may not be the same at every Colosso or whatever, but he is contracted for 65 combat engagements over that entire year. He could die in any of them. And from what we understand, the majority of that payout comes after the year is over.
65 fights in a year is crazy.
Insane.
Yeah.
Insane. For the best martial artists in the world. There was a guy who he fought 4 to 5 times in a calendar year. Or was it 4 times? 4 times in a calendar year in title fights in the UFC. And he lost his last one, Merab Dvalishvili. And this guy's a freak athlete. But 65 combat engagements in a year.
Life and death encounters.
Life and death encounters. Like you could die in any of them. This is a long shot for a lot of people, especially when you're on the side of the
myrmidons
every time.
Yeah.
Is insane to think about.
Yep.
So it must be so, I mean, theoretically, it must be so lucrative that he would be able to buy a ship at the end of this period of the story. Otherwise, it's hard to imagine anybody making it through that. Also, because he signed on the dotted line, he can't leave anymore. The moment that he signed away his rights and decided to be in Colosso, he is in those 65 combat engagements. And it mentions that they will get their money's worth out of him, particularly Count Bailey and Mataro, which is the first we've heard of House Mataro ruling over Imesh. This is the first time we hear of the leader of Imesh, and particularly the Count of Borisivo. Bailey and Mataro is his name. As Hadrian is thinking about all these different things and trying to focus on fear as a poison and all this different stuff, using his tricks to center himself, the girl next to him is literally pissing herself. He remarks the fact that they are closer to the ancient Greeks in their armor and what they are arrayed in, whereas he knows that the gladiators are wearing top of the line Legion armor, which if you think about it is like 20,000 years difference in technology between what he's wearing and what the gladiators are wearing. And he remarks the fact that they will not be able to kill the gladiators. Most gladiators do not die in Colosso because they're so expensive. They are the professional athletes of this world, right? So the armor sort of protects them from death in these moments because they're on these big contracts, and their weapons aren't good enough to get through that armor and actually hurt them. They are enough. Is a mechanism by which they can immobilize these gladiators and win the fight potentially.
So it's like my understanding is that they can't kill the gladiators really, but they're trying to simulate a fight. So like if I go and I get close to one and I swing my sword and I strike their arm, the suit will immobilize their arm to simulate the fact that I've cut their arm off without actually harming them, so that I can technically win without harming the gladiator, right? So there's like a built-in way to make the fight actually happen and give some semblance of a fight. It's just a really, really, really unfair fight, and they actually get to actually kill you.
Yeah.
They're
not
like
given that luxury at all.
Right.
He thinks of the terms shock and awe and blood and thunder, which are blood and thunder is like I wonder if that's actually a reference because he's mentioned the book a few times. Blood and
Robert E.
Thunder
Howard?
is the Robert E. Howard, Life and Art of Robert E. Howard in particular.
Yep.
Maybe that's just because he's on a kick of Robert E. Howard. But shock and awe is also known as rapid dominance. It's the military strategy that is based on the use of overwhelming power and spectacular displays of force to paralyze the enemy's perception of the battlefield and destroy their will to fight. So the plan is simple. They have the numbers. They are in 5 groups of 5. They know that they are going to outnumber the gladiators regardless. They don't know how many gladiators there will be, but they know they will have the numbers on them. So hit them hard, hit them fast, and overwhelm them quickly. Use the advantages that they have. And as this is like stalling and the doors begin shuttering open, Hadrian just thinks to himself, man, I wish I would have spent more time in tactics class paying attention to Felix. This is sort of very, very relatable. Like, gosh, I should have walking into a test wishing that you had studied more.
Yep.
But in this case, the test is life or death. And the doors open up and 80,000 people are screaming and excited. And we're in literally the inverse situation of Delos, right? He was in a box representing the leader, and now he is on the side of the myrmidons in the bottom of it, experiencing it from the myrmidons' perspective and from the perspective of somebody fighting in there. We hear that this arena is about the size of a football field, like 100 yards long. But in this case, in this configuration, there are a bunch of stone pillars that have emerged from the floor, none of which are the same size. So it's not like Corellian columns that are just sprinkled throughout. You have a bunch of stone pillars. Imagine you ever watched the Star Wars films, Attack of the Clones sequence when they're in that gladiatorial thing. I imagine that, but like the pillars are not quite as big and they're everywhere throughout the whole thing. They're not just where they're tied onto. He also notes the fact that above the entire stadium, above it is a dome. It's a giant Royce field that protects the crowd from being hit with anything outside of it, like somebody throwing a javelin and stabbing somebody in the first row, as well as it sort of insulates some of the sound. The Prudence Field is what it's called. On the other side of the field, 5 gladiators emerge. And so we get this image called back to that we saw on Delos of these being professional athletes. But this isn't the same home team, right? This isn't the Marlow Devils. This isn't the black and red or whatever, but we're getting a world building thing of these gladiators are arrayed in green and gold, which must be the colors of House Mataro or the local team or whatever. We find out that the team's name is the Borisivo Sphinxes, which is a great name.
I love that.
They're wearing this like ceramic imperial armor. They're wielding shields, and Hadrian is splitting, looking at them, and then finally seeing in real life Bailey and Mataro, the Count of Emesh. First, he's seen him on broadcast and things like that, but he's never seen him in person before. He notes the fact that around the Count are some of the Umand who are serving him as slaves. Some of the Umand are helping the duelators remove dead bodies, particularly this dead body of this land crustacean predator figure that has just died. And at that point, Hadrian's like, oh, I guess we weren't the first ones. It calls back to the same situation with the giant Venus flytrap dragon looking thing from the beginning of it. Hadrian's 5 people with him in this moment, his group of 5 are Switch, Kiri, who's this mom, right? Like we mentioned before, Polino and this random recruit. And the moment the fight starts, everything shifts and nothing is going to work
Well,
because they realize
the prudence shield
that
is up.
the the prudence shield is up for another reason as well.
Right.
And the primary reason is the fact that these 5 gladiators aren't just with javelins, swords, and shields. They are with energy lances and are shooting hot plasma at them currently. So not only is the armor 15,000 years or 20,000 years more advanced than what they have, now you're bringing a machine gun, like you're bringing a musket to a sword fight.
You're bringing a laser to a sword fight.
Yeah, laser to a sword
It's like,
fight.
it is
It's
really,
the musket version of a laser, but yes.
it's really bad. It's really, really bad. Yeah.
And immediately everybody's hiding behind these pillars and they're trying to reassess. They realize that their shields, that ones that they have, their hoplite shields are not going to last. He asked Polino, like, are they gonna work? And he's like, nah, maybe 1 or 2 shots, but don't expect them to last out. And Polino looks at him and says, it's a call. I knew I should have killed you when I had the chance. So what we come to find out, and it isn't specifically written on the page in big block letters, but these gladiators, like the whole thing that Hadrian did about his speech, about trying to bring everybody back up, whatever, made this situation worse. His specific speech was listened to either by the count or something. It was caught on video and the gladiators heard it and are now fighting with real weapons and are going to slaughter every single person in here.
Yeah.
This is not a fair fight. It wasn't a fair fight to begin with. Now it is super not a fair fight.
Yeah, this is intended to be just a slaughter fest. It's not even supposed to. It's not supposed to be a competition. They're just calling the herd. Not
Hadrian,
good.
no, this is the worst possible situation that they could go in, especially for the first time. They realized that the original plan that they had, which was going to be, in groups of 5, take them on or whatever, head to head, use the shields, get closer, overwhelm them, which would work if they were using swords and spears and shields, right? Potentially. Now that they have laser guns, that's not going to work. So Hadrian quickly realizes we need to split them up. We need to outflank them. We need to use this terrain. We're going to have any chance at winning. And the moment that he mentions this random guy that's in his group of 5 says, like, who put you in charge? And then immediately the guy gets blasted in the center of the chest with a laser thing. Fate intervenes and like he's shot. It's really convenient, but it shows to serve. 1 shot took this guy out. So even the fact that they're wearing out the armor, it will mean nothing. If you get hit with one of these, you are going to die. He remarks to the fact that there are basically 5 roided out professional toy soldiers in the best gear that humanity can offer versus 20 people who are outfitted like Greeks in the Trojan War. But then he like chuckles at the fact that it's basically 5 Crispins.
Yeah. That was such a low blow. It's like, brother, crisp. It actually was, it was interesting because at this moment I was like, actually it's a side remark, but it is a little bit of a reality dose for the fact of like what Crispin was excited for. Because literally Crispin was excited to be doing this exact thing that, it is an actual critique of Crispin. It's a more fair critique than some of the other ones. So 5 Crispins.
And it's one thing if he's critiquing Crispin's ethic from the box and him leaving. It's a totally other thing if he's critiquing it from the standpoint of I've been the other guy in the Colosso.
I agree.
At this point, he basically, now that the guy who was complaining about him changing tactics is dead, he's like, we need to split up. We need to fan out. Switch at this moment is unable to move. Like he's like almost catatonic. Hadrian tries to snap him out of it and is unsuccessful. He's doing everything he can. It's like, you need to listen.
I will note the freezing response is a physiological response to extreme traumatic circumstances, right? So this is something that people tend to view as like a moral failure or something like that. This is something that happens physically to people. It's not something they decide to do. You can induce this amongst sharks, for example, by flipping them upside down. They freeze, they stop. So this is something that a lot of creatures do because in a lot of serious traumatic situations, it's actually safer to stop and not immediately run and react. It just happens to also be the case that sometimes stopping and freezing gets you killed, but it's something that tends to happen automatically. So people all over this scene are like, freezing and like freaking out in the middle of the circumstance.
Which would be enough if they were fighting a more fair fight with swords and
Right.
spears or whatever. With laser guns, it is death that is staring
Right.
them in the face.
Yep.
Hadrian says that he's got a plan, and Switch questions him like, what plan? Hadrian points out the fact that the gladiators are not fighting in a team. They're not fighting as a team, because if they were fighting as a team, they would have no shot, essentially. They would just sit back, they would just pick them off one by one, and the fight would be over. But they are 5 roided out professional individuals that are stalking prey. They are at a deer feeder, and they have a rifle just waiting to fire. Right? This is a harvest. It is not sporting hunting. But because they are fighting as 5 individuals, coordination and outflanking them and using the terrain is the opportunity to outmaneuver them. So Hadrian sees a woman gladiator, a gladiatrix, and he sneaks up on her as she's aiming for another target, while the remainder of his group flank her from the other side. She recognizes that it's him, but turns, and it's too close. Like she shoots, but she misses Hadrian at his feet in this moment. And then he gets too close for her. She tries to use the butt of the weapon to try and hit him. He's too close. He's too good at sword play. He's fighting her back. He hits towards Banks, who is this other myrmidon and the other half of his group that's trying this plan out. He hits her in the leg with his sword, which slows her down because the armor seizes up, like you mentioned. She drops the lance, grabs her long knife. He hits her in the arm, and like she's not left-handed, so she can't really do anything. That might be later. She drops the lance. She grabs her long knife to try and fight against Hadrian. Meanwhile, Banks from the other side crashes into her with the group of myrmidons and just hit her from behind, immobilizing her and ending her part of the battle. At which point Hadrian realizes she's going to lose money because of this. She should not have lost. It's a huge upset. So then the plan is, okay, just do that, but 4 more times. They think for a moment, hey, can we use this lance? Like, is there a possibility that we could even the odds just a little bit? But quickly realize that it's connected and interfaced with the armor. We can't use it. It's a smart weapon.
It sucks so bad because like at least if you're in a situation like this and if you take someone out, you can start to even odds, but even that doesn't work in this situation, which is just so frustrating.
The odds are getting progressively worse as time goes on because people are dying all around them too.
Yeah.
They're not going out of this unscathed. People have already died at this point. Hadrian can't find Switch, but Gen and Siren join up with him. They mention that they saw Switch with some others a few seconds ago. Hadrian's trying to get an assessment of how many people that they have left. It's at least 4, probably 5 by his count. And he's doing the math in his head. Let's assume worst case scenario based on my count. That's 5 to 1. We're not going to survive if that ratio keeps going. So we've got to figure this thing out. But Banks or somebody else mentions the fact that Apollina's been around for 5 years beating the Sphinxes. I bet he's already gotten one. And it turns out he has. So that's something we learn about Pollino, right? This guy has one eye. He is signed on for 5 years. I don't know if he's a criminal or not. We haven't gotten that explicitly written at this point. But if he's been around for 5 years, this guy knows what he is doing. Nobody survives 5 years without knowing what they're doing. They find out that he has incapacitated one of them, but they also find more bodies than they were expected. So as 3 gladiators are left, Hadrian is now doing the math and said, oh, it's like maybe we've got 12 people or ish, like 13, 12 people left. This isn't good. And narrator Hadrian sort of takes an aside here, looking at the bodies that we see on the page, where these 3 myrmidons using these old tactics of a triad, where they're sort of back to back in this circle area. The narrator mentions that he's seen many men die like this, especially when facing the Cielcen with these tactics. So we get a callback to the broader
another drip
issue.
Feed.
Yeah. So we know that many men have died like this in the narrator's mind, at least. He's seen plenty of people die this way. They duck behind the pillars, darting in and out to avoid fire from the 3 remaining ones. One gladiator that's remaining has lost his lance somehow, but has picked up 2 of the myrmidons' swords. They also, the prudence field doesn't wash out all of the sound, but it muffles it a little bit. It's strangely quiet above. The fact that there are 2 gladiators down already is already a big deal. But as they're waiting for these other 2 gladiators have lances, one gladiator has 2 swords. They're sort of stalling a little bit, trying to figure out the tactics, talking to each other. But they realize very quickly, no, wait, they're going to drop these pillars if we don't move quickly. And other people are like, they're not going to do that. Why would they do that? In the moment they think that, these pillars begin sinking into the ground. So the plan at this point is to leave the one with the 2 swords up for last, because he's the least immediate threat, at least for far.
They can't get shot by him.
Exactly. These guys are 10 paces away as these pillars descend. Hadrian notices that these type of energy lances take time between shots. It's auto-loading, but it's a one-shot, one-hitter quitter sort of gun, like a musket, like an energy musket. So every time that they shoot, they have a little pause between shots. So the gladiator shoots at somebody, and then Hadrian describes this tunnel vision that he has as he begins charging this guy with his shield up. The first shot hits his shield as he runs at them. The second shot from this other gladiator, not knowing that, or being shocked that Hadrian's there, goes wide. The gladiator with 2 swords turns his back to the myrmidons that are flanking him, looking at Hadrian in this moment. These pillars are now completely gone. This psychopath, Hadrian, decides in this moment, after like fielding this shield that has been shot. So theoretically, he's got maybe 1 or 2 shots left before the shield just completely disintegrates. He is stopped in front of this guy, and in his head begins counting the seconds until he thinks that the lance will be recharged, at which point he throws his only protection at the guy who fired the lance first, and miraculously times it, because the gladiator in the moment sees that the shield's coming for him, but thinks, the Roy shield is going to block it. But it hits him just as he fires, because it goes through the Royce shield. So calling back to the moment with Switch and the helmet earlier, Hadrian actually puts it into practice here. And the moment that the shot goes wide up and it hits the Prudence shield, from the back, Gen and Siren swarm and begin hitting the guy and immobilizing him in his armor. At which point Hadrian circles around, attacks the second gladiator, hitting the man's right arm that's holding the lance. And then the gladiator pulls out his knife like the gladiatrix before, but he's not left-handed, and Hadrian mocks the fact that he's not. And Hadrian's too good at sword work for this guy to beat him with one arm and with a knife. So with his fancy tricks, he dispatches the man pretty quickly. And then at that point, the fight's done. Hadrian remarks at the idea that he expected there to be this like this glorious swell at the end of it, like there was with Crispin at the end of Crispin's moment. But it's not like that, because he isn't in the position that Crispin is in. He's the myrmidon. He's not the gladiator. And he remarks the fact that it doesn't really work like that in the real world, especially not from his vantage point. And he just feels this dump of adrenaline. Like all of the feelings that he had before now flood back over him. The Prudence shield goes down. And then at that point, they hear the screams of 80,000 people. This is the biggest upset in years from what we understand. And everybody, let's be honest, everybody loves an upset.
Yeah.
The fights, I'm a huge UFC fan. I love crazy fights and I love crazy finishes and things like that. The ones that stand out in my mind the most are the upsets. The crazy finishes that are upsets are insane. So everybody loves it. We find out that in the end, 12 myrmidons remain standing. Switch survives. So Switch, Gen, Polino, Siren, Kiri, and Hadrian are at least the majority. We don't know about Banks. I don't think we find out, but 12 end up surviving. And at that point, the 12 that are basking in their glory look up to the box, and Balian Mataro, who's being projected, raises his hand and quiets the crowd. He congratulates the Myrmidons. He says that we haven't seen a fight like this in many, many seasons, and that all of these Myrmidons are getting a 50 Hurasam bonus. Just a few things to note as we end this chapter. Hadrian looking at Balian Mataro, this is the first sort of planetary figure that he has to compare to his father, and he's sort of the polar opposite in many ways. He is gaudy, he's adorned with gold and rings and all this different stuff, where his dad was sparse. This guy has a pretty warm sort of personality from what we hear. Like his voice is described as sounding like wine, like a wine-laden voice. He's warm where Alistair is cold. It's sort of a polar opposite perspective from somebody at the same level, theoretically. You see this a lot in fighting, when after a fight, if guys had beef before the fight, they get back up to each other and like will shake hands and pray or whatever, right? Like they'll squash the beef after they've fought against each other, regardless of who won. Sometimes that blood continues because people are jerks and that people are people, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But the majority of fights you see in the UFC afterwards, guys are pretty respectful at the fact that they just fought in a cage against each other and are both going back home to their families. Hadrian gets this moment with Gen a little bit. they don't get this like word exchange, but they get a look like, the respect that he had gained at the beginning with jokes and with beating him on the training ground is now fully realized post-fight at the fact that Hadrian, when the moment of crisis comes, especially with a sword in his hand, is good.
I think he says like that thing with the shield was damn clever, bro.
Yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
that was clever. Yeah. I love that moment because it's, it's similar to a moment in Dune actually, where like the shields alter the way that people fight, and therefore it affects your thought process about fighting when you either don't have them or suddenly a projectile isn't moving fast enough for the shield to block them. Right? You can imagine if you're used to having a shield, you would build up a tolerance to flinching or projectiles headed at you because you just sort of learn to discount them because you can continue fighting. Because the shield, the clever move with the throwing the shield was that it plays on the fact that you have a growing instinct to not pay attention to projectiles because your shield gets it. But turns out this one goes through. Great display of the shield physics in world, but also giving Hadrian a really cool Captain America moment to.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, it totally is.
It's sick. Gen calls it out. Great end to the chapter with a little callback to the bread and circuses.
Yeah, sort of takes on a new meaning, right?
Yes, yeah.
It realizes a new meaning because it's not from the bread and circuses, hoity-toity, I'm leaving Colosso. Bread and circuses is, oh my goodness, I've survived, and luckily for me, I am getting compensated for it. Right?
Yep.
What a great action-filled sequence this chapter is.
It's great. It's fantastic. I really like it. I think this is where we truly get to see the first full sequence from Rocchio.
Yeah.
We've had some small stuff, but this is sort of a display of what he's able to do. There's real displays of what combat is kind of like. There's also some details about, the way that swordplay actually works. You're getting too close to someone with a longer weapon, therefore they can't actually strike you because you're now too close, and the sword is actually better than the lance when you're up in somebody's face. All of these details play into how the fights feel, and it's just very kinetic and energized the whole time. It's fantastic. It's really fun and a really satisfying end to the first one.
I will say this one thing that I just thought about with regards to this section. The adequate description of like bringing a knife to a gunfight is great. Like there's a lot of science fiction. Dune sort of falls into this too of I'm going to hand wave a lot of stuff with these shields because the slow blade, blah, 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 right? It's an excuse to have sword fights. Well, this is the first time in the series that we really get a sword fight, but they're also showing the impact of sword fights don't always win you the battle, right? Like it's going to, bringing a knife to a gunfight, you are underhanded, like you are outmatched. It's a different take on those old school 50s sci-fi people that just wanted to hand wave laser guns so that they could write fantasy sword fights in science fiction. I think it's a very interesting way of putting it.
I will say one thing that this series has in its benefit is that projectiles still feel important. And,
yes,
and I think that is totally a great observation, and I think it actually matters. He's managed to weave an interesting, pathway with the way he constructed the shields for this universe to give epic sword fight moments, but also preserve the potential for cool energy weapons and stuff like that. So it's a smart thing that he's done here.
Yeah. Well, that's one down, 64 left to go before Hadrian can get off this, but that's where we will end today's episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club. And as we say always, we continue, always forward
and always down.
And we will see you next time.
See you, folks.
Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 34, 35, and 36 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by Daw Books on July 3rd, 2018. Quality editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2026, Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us. And remember, rage is blindness.